Hey guys, in this video I'm going to look at some of the settings that you need to set up in Zoom in order to use it effectively as an instructor. So let's go ahead and get started. Go ahead and go to your institution's Zoom page. For me, it's my institution.zoom.us. When you get there, it should look something like this. So this is what we're going to be working with today. When I first log in, this is the page that it takes me to, is this page to plan a meeting. I'm not going to worry so much about planning meetings. First, what I want to do is I just want to look at your profile. So if you go to your profile, the thing that I want to show you is this personal link here. So by default, Zoom gives you some kind of link to your Zoom channel, but you can customize the end of that. So you can see here when I click customize, it gives me the option to go ahead and decide what I want to call my channel. So then I can give people this Zoom link. It's just kind of nice so that students, it's easier to remember what your Zoom channel is actually called when you do it this way, instead of having to remember some random digit code. So I always do that first thing. That way my students know exactly what we're going to use. Mostly what I want to talk about today is the settings for your Zoom channel. There are some really important settings that I think allow us to use Zoom more effectively, but most of those settings are not on by default. So I want to go through my settings and let you know what settings I have turned on and why I use those. So the first settings are for your meeting, to schedule a meeting. I'm not too concerned about scheduling a meeting. What I usually do is, because I'm going to use my Zoom channel on a weekly basis with one of my classes, I just go to my LMS and I just post a copy of my link to my Zoom channel in there. So students can go to the LMS and click on that every week when it's time to join. I do that for a couple of reasons. First, it's nice that I'm not having to set up a reminder for every day that we have class. But also, it means that they're already in the LMS, and chances are during class, I'm going to have them work in the LMS anyway. So by having them go ahead and just go to the LMS to get to Zoom, it accomplishes a couple of things. So I'm going to scroll down to where we first get to our in-meeting settings. There's two levels of in-meeting settings. You can see these are basic. The next level is advanced. I want to go through both of these levels and talk about some of the settings that I want to change in here. So the first setting that you can see that I have on is the chat. I think the chat is usually set up by default. I would not turn chat off. I think it's nice to have that back channel. I use it every time I teach, whether it's asking students questions so they can go into the chat and post answers, or having students post experiences or questions in the chat. I also like to keep the private chat on. Now, a little note on the private chat. Some students will use this unresponsibly. I am not always responsible as a student or participant in Zoom when it comes to the private chat. Make sure your students know the expectations. Let them know that the private chat is there. I think it's a great thing for students to use as another back channel. Maybe to do the same, to use it in the same way that they would maybe whisper to a friend or someone they're sitting next to in class. And that's really how I mostly use private chat, but usually when I'm whispering to people in class, it's not to ask questions, it's to make jokes. So make sure your students are going to use it responsibly, but I would not turn it off because I think the affordances are worth some of those costs. If you're going to have students do something in the chat and you want to make sure the chat is saved, I would go ahead and auto-save chats. I don't auto-save my chats, and that's because I primarily use Zoom as a mean to record class, and then I post those recordings to YouTube for my class once we've finished. I turn off play sound when participants join or leave because there's nothing more annoying than having dozens of people jump in and out of a meeting and hearing a chime every time. So I have that turned off. I don't allow hosts or participants to send files through the chat. Most of the files that I need students to access are in Google Drive, so I can still post a link in the chat to those files, but I don't allow them to actually attach any files in the chat. I don't give Zoom feedback because it's just one more thing I don't need. I don't display the end of meeting experience feedback survey because it's just one more hoop that my students would have to jump through. Co-host, this is a very important one. Regardless of whether you have a teaching assistant or a co-teacher, I would turn co-host on. It allows you to do a lot of things that require too much multitasking if you don't have it on. And as we know from research, multitasking, not a real thing. So I turn co-host on. I do have a TA in most of the classes that I teach, or a co-teacher in most of the classes that I teach. And so we use that co-host. One of the great things about the co-host position is when we use breakout rooms, which I'll get to in a second, when we use breakout rooms, the co-host can actually jump back and forth between breakout rooms, and I think they might be able to edit them. They cannot set up breakout rooms. Only the host can set up breakout rooms, and I think it's only the host of the channel. So even if we were in my channel and I made you the host, you would not be able to set up breakout rooms because it's my channel. I have to set up the breakout rooms. But then if I make you co-host, you can jump around from room to room. And so one of the nice things about that is if I have 5 breakout rooms, then me and my TA can just start in 2 different places and then just keep rotating through the rooms so that a room is seeing either me or my TA every few minutes. And so it's just a great way to make sure students are really working. It's a great way to keep conversations going, and it's a great way to monitor and know when are the breakout rooms really done and we can bring people back to the main session. Polling, I think polling is really important. Think about the way that you might use something like Kahoot to get real live data. One of the kind of unfortunate downsides of Zoom polling is that it will only give you data once the poll has closed. But I use the data to ask all sorts of questions. For example, one of the classes I teach, we use mastery quizzes. Before I teach that class, every week I go through and look at the data for those mastery quizzes, and I decide, what questions did students really struggle with? And so I'll take those questions and I'll create them into poll items. And so I'll open up that poll at the beginning of class and ask students, hey, these were questions that some of you saw in the quiz. Go ahead, go through them and answer them, and then submit the poll. And then I can see 30% got this question right, or 60% got this question right, and it lets me know where I should focus my time. Then I can go through, I can talk about it, I can teach them maybe what they're missing, and then I use the poll again. And I have them take the same poll, and I can see, oh look, now 99% of them are getting it right, or 90% of them are getting it right. And I know that we were really effective in how we used our time in Zoom. So I think polling is really important, and it's something that everybody should turn on. In another video, I'll talk about how to create those polls and how to use them while you're teaching. I never put anybody on hold. If you always want to see the toolbar, you can do that. I rarely minimize Zoom, so it's not a big problem for me. Screen sharing, I would turn on and I would allow all of your participants to share their screen. It's nice if you're having students do some activity or write something or create something during Zoom that they can share that with everybody else. So allowing all participants to share their screen means that you can just say, hey, Susie, go ahead and share your screen with us and show us the slide you created. Or you can go to a group. Yeah, group 1 in the breakout room. You guys, created this slide. Will you guys go ahead and share your screen and let us see? Even if you put them into breakout rooms, they still have the ability to screen share. So maybe they're going to collaborate on creating some kind of document or a slide or a quiz or something. They're creating something together in that group. You could have one person in that group share their screen so that everybody can see what they're talking about. So I would definitely have screen sharing on, and I would definitely make sure all participants can share. I do keep it so that only the host can take over somebody else's sharing. I just think that's important because sometimes somebody's sharing and I want to share my screen. Instead of having them close their sharing and then me share, it just expedites that process. I don't want everybody else to be able to take over somebody else's, to take over the sharing on Zoom whenever somebody else is sharing, so I reserve that right to the host only. You can disable the desktop share. That just means that it limits what they'll be able to share. They can only share, specific windows. They can't share their whole desktop. If you're worried about students sharing their desktop, you can turn that on. It's usually not a worry that I have. Using annotation tools is important. The whiteboard is kind of a cool feature. So it allows you to basically create a digital whiteboard that you can share with students, and so you could write on it like you would write on a real whiteboard. Now, it probably works better if you're using a tablet or a computer with a touch screen. I've tried using it with my mouse. It's not quite as effective as maybe just having a slide prepared or creating a drawing real fast in a Google Doc, but it's still a tool that I like to have access to. Remote control, that allows other people to take control. I do have that turned on. I don't know that I use it very often. Nonverbal feedback I think is really important, and I'll show this in another video. This is in the participants tab. It gives your participants more options for the feedback that they can give you. Things like asking you to speed up or slow down, or raising their hand, or saying, hey, we've been in this Zoom call now for an hour and a half, I need a break. And so it can be a really good way to get feedback without disrupting the flow of what's happening in the meeting. Then allow removed participants to rejoin. It's really just if you're going to time someone out or kick somebody out of the meeting, whether or not you want them to rejoin. So now let's look at the advanced ones. I talked about breakout rooms before. Definitely turn on breakout rooms. One of the disadvantages of not having the breakout rooms is that you're going to turn your Zoom class or your Zoom session into just a lecture where you're just talking and there's no interaction, and if that's what you're going to do, you might as well just record a video like I am right now. You want students to be able to collaborate with each other, to communicate with each other, to work together. You want to have those small group discussions, and breakout rooms allow you to do that. You can see I've also checked allow hosts to assign participants breakout rooms when scheduling. Again, I don't schedule my classes, so I've never used that feature, but I have it checked just so if I wanted to schedule and I wanted to use maybe the same groups every time I went to that class, that option is available for me. For the most part, when I use breakout rooms, I just create random groups. Other things that you can see here, more remote learning or the more remote support and control. I don't use that. I don't use the closed captioning or the saved captions. I definitely don't use far end camera control. I don't want anyone to take control of my camera. If I have my camera muted, it's probably for a reason. I do have virtual background on, and that is because what is behind me is a green screen. I teach from home. I don't necessarily need everybody to see what my place of living looks like. Plus, where I teach, my wife is often wandering around back there with my son, and people in my class don't need to see my wife and son doing their daily things. When I teach, the background that students see is the one that you saw at the beginning of this video. This is what it looks like when I'm teaching. I just have this background behind me, and I love to use that. I think it's nice. It makes it look classy, and again, students don't have to see where I actually live. For something like this, then I just make the green screen completely invisible, so you can see that it does cut off in places, but it allows me to create this nice box. So that's why I have virtual background on. I do think that virtual background might be limited to just PC users. I don't remember if I've been able to get it to use with my Mac. I know at some point it was not working on my Mac, but I primarily teach from my PC, so it's not a problem for me. You can see here, this one's turned on. It's locked by my university administrator. Attention tracking, this is such a cool feature. So when students minimize Zoom, what attention tracking does is in the participants tab, puts a little clock icon next to their name, so you know as the instructor or the host, is this person actually watching what I'm doing, or are they in another window? Have they minimized Zoom? And there are some times where you might expect them to minimize Zoom. Maybe you're wanting them to follow you through a process and they need to minimize Zoom to do that. It's a nice way to just kind of give you a little bit of information. It's not going to, be a panacea that tells you exactly what students are doing, but it's a nice way for you to have a little indicator of whether or not they're following along. And I think that's it as far as meeting settings. Those are all the things that I turn on and that I use in the classes that I teach on a weekly basis. Go through, look at the settings for yourself. You might find something that you like more that I'm not using. You might find something that I'm using that you decide is really not worth it. And that's okay. What's most important is that you have some of these settings, you now have a baseline to start, and I think that's going to be really important. So as I alluded to, this is just one video in a series of videos that I'm going to create about using Zoom. The next video is going to be about how you can use Zoom as an instructor. So I'm going to talk about actually putting some of the pieces that we talked about today into practice and what that actually looks like in the Zoom interface. So if you have interest in that, find that other video in my channel. I'll link to it below, and thank you for watching.